On today's episode of An Echo of Glory, we discuss the week at the club, that Dele Alli interview, and have a brilliant chat about the recent ticket price hike with former Trust chairs Katrina Law and Martin Cloake. Welcome to An Echo of Glory. On today's episode, I'm joined by Gary Diamond.
Evening.
And just Gary Diamond. We've got an empty chair, but we think the empty chair might actually make more sense than Jake Robson. But tonight we are actually filming in front of a live studio audience. About 4 people. But there you go. So this is something new for the Echo of Glory podcast. Gary, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. How's your week been?
Yeah, up and down. But a bit of Spurs news, as we like to do. Start at the top. New signing, Manor Solomon. Talked about it last week. Signed, sealed, delivered. Happy?
Yeah, I think so. Ultimately, I think it's a no-lose signing. It's on a free as long as his output next season is more than Danjuma and Mora, then the squad is better off.
It couldn't be much worse than Mora as well. The goal at the end of the season was great, but
I think between Danjuma and Mora last season, we're probably 2 goals positive net equity. So as long as he scores more than 2 goals or whatever. But look, it's a good signing. He's a good player. He's got a lot of promise. It's a logical signing.
Yeah. 17-year-old attacking midfielder Oliver Iro signed his first professional contract with the club. Do you know anything about him as our go-to youth expert?
I don't, and I haven't got in touch with
John. Maybe the chair knows more than you.
No, it's another young player that's signing his first professional contract, very highly thought of at Spurs, so it can only be good news.
Okay. Bit of Spurs women news. Women's World Cup starts next week. There's a few Spurs players on the plane to Australia and New Zealand for various countries. But they've announced the appointment of Robert Villarm. Again, I'm not sure about pronunciation. A highly rated Swedish coach. He's coached at Häcken, who are a very successful Swedish club and in European competition. And they've also signed 27-year-old Swiss defender Luana Bühler from Hoffenheim. They've signed a defender. We'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah, they've signed a defender.
They've signed a defender, but we will come back to that. Also in the news this week, a couple of players that much maligned on social media and by fans. Eric Dyer's done a little documentary on Eric Dyer, and Ryan Sessegnon has got injured again. Let's start with Sessegnon. Frustrating for him. I'm not 100% sure that Sessegnon would be in Ange's plans. Maybe he would. I think everyone's got a clean slate, obviously, but he wouldn't be my first choice. But frustrating for him.
These are 2 players that we've spoken about a fair bit on this pod already. We had, I think, in our very first episode, our 5 out, and I had Sessegnon in there. But what I think is interesting about the Sessegnon and Dyer news, and it was something that we were talking, yesterday. That when we were putting the show together, we were talking that we need to discuss this, and this was before the Dele Alli interview dropped today. And what came across with Sessegnon and Dyer, I'll start with Sessegnon. He's got a hamstring injury and he's had to have surgery. He wanted to avoid that surgery. He's battled injury for a long, long time. Look, I have been upfront in saying I think the guy's shot of confidence. I don't think he's going to achieve the potential that we signed, and I think it's time to move him on. But what struck me was the reaction on social media, almost as though he's choosing to have these injuries and it's his fault that he's having these injuries. And it was eye-opening. And as I say, even before the Dyer the Dele Alli documentary, it was eye-opening. And then we had Spurs drop the Eric Dyer documentary. Now, again, whatever we think about Eric Dyer's capabilities on the pitch, what is true is that this guy has been a fantastic servant of the club. He's spoken up for the club. He's one of the only players that's gone into press conferences and says, I don't like the way people talk about Tottenham. Yeah. He's passionate about the club. He feels about the club. And I think too often we're so desperate for success that as fans, we don't consider actually the feelings and the emotional well-being of players enough. This is a guy that wants to be at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, and every time he pulls on the shirt, and I say this for just about every player with the exception of one, Every time they put on the shirt, you have to think they're doing and giving their utmost for the club. Okay,
You're talking about Ndombele again.
You can say it for me. But look, Dyer's been a fantastic servant, and the reaction to this to this documentary was they're not listening to the room again. They've got this completely wrong. It's the wrong player to have had the documentary about. Listen, any insight that we have to a player's life, I think, is fascinating.
Yeah, fans talk about the disconnect between players and fans has widened over the years. So the club do something, they don't like the choice of player.
Yeah, exactly, and they absolutely coat it off. But it's a fascinating insight to how have they come to be where they are today. And Eric Dyer's story is an interesting one. He's an English kid that's gone off to live in Portugal. I haven't watched the documentary yet. I will do it. But it's a fascinating story, what he must have gone through and how he must have grown up. How do you not put aside your personal feelings to say, actually, that's an interesting human piece? Yeah. But it did strike me, the reactions on social media towards Ryan Sessegnon's injury and the documentary for Eric Dyer. And then it tied in, of course, to...
Yeah, Dele Alli.
Yeah.
One of the most stunning 20-minute interviews I've ever watched. Look, Dele Alli was a fantastic player for Spurs under Pochettino for 3-4 seasons. Personally, I thought his race was run a while before he left. I feel like his form had dipped, and I was very much, I think Dele's done here. I had no idea what was going on in his life, what happened growing up. I feel a little bit bad criticising his performances now, but it really was a fascinating interview.
I don't think we should ever get to a point where we should fear criticising somebody's performance, right? That's their job. But when it crosses over into abuse away from the pitch or whatever it is, then that's where there's the line, right? But that interview this morning was it was harrowing. It was hard to watch, and it just goes to such a big topic everywhere at the minute about mental health, and we don't know what the person next to you is going through. No. I know that a number of people, I myself have said over the last couple of years, he's got to be going through something. And it just all sort of tied in. I mean, we can talk about the Dele Alli interviews as much or as little as we want. What comes from it is we as fans have to do better. We have to be better.
But not just fans. I was go back to just before COVID, I was trying to get a TV documentary off the ground, which never happened, which was looking at how different sports deal with mental health issues. It was mostly post after retiring from the game, but also the journey for a sportsman and the support that they get. And I sat down with then Worcestershire cricket captain Daryl Mitchell, who was the head of the PCA, the Professional Cricketers Association, and he talked about the work that cricket does. And it's obviously a much smaller sport, there's less money, and cricketers, and this has become a wider discussion in the last few weeks, cricketers may be more privileged, so a lot of them leave the game and they have education and they go on and become lawyers and accountants and whatever, or they stay in the game and become coaches. And that's great, but I don't think football, it's definitely getting better. Definitely getting better. There is much more support. I personally know someone working in that field who now goes into clubs and from a very young age talks to these players who often come from nothing, and on their first contract they're making thousands and thousands of pounds a week, and they're in that bubble, and maybe when it ends, or not even when it ends, during it they struggle to deal with it. And Dele Alli, he might be alone in a horrific abuse that he suffered, but he won't be alone in finding it very, very hard to cope with the fame and fortune so quickly. And I think football has to do better.
You say it's improved. I wonder if it has, because
it's improving. I trust that it's improving.
But you listen to that Dele Alli interview today, and he said, people don't know what went on in my youth. People don't know what mentally impacts me. One of our best players in recent history, Paul Gascoigne, was at the club, and he was wacky and balmy, and we look back at Gazza and we say we needed to take care of him better, but nobody at the club at that time knew what Gazza had gone through, and it's mirrored. Nobody knew what Dele Alli has gone through. Nobody was there to support him. Gazza suffers from Tourette's. It stemmed from, as I understand it, he was playing football in the street as a kid, lost control of the ball. His friend ran into the road and got whacked by a car, and he blames himself to this day. And from that day on, I think he developed mental issues and mental health issues.
But I think footballers are scared to speak. I think they feel there's they show maybe a bit of weakness. It's a man's game. All this sort of stuff. I think life is changing for the better. That these players will speak out.
But they don't need to speak out to us.
No.
Okay, but
professionals.
This is what I'm talking about. Has it got better? Why was Dele Alli not in a situation within his club, within his environment, behind closed doors, where he's gone to a rehab centre and learnt how to open up and talk, and he spoke very well about that. But why wasn't that available to him at the club? Why are all clubs now not looking at every player they've got?
Well, they are. I can tell you that they are.
Yeah,
they have much. The welfare at clubs now is so much better than it was even 5 years ago.
Well, look, I mean, I think in the aftermath of that document, all I can say is I wish Ryan Sessegnon a speedy recovery.
Yeah.
I don't think he'll ever hit the heights that we wanted, and I'm not sat here saying I don't want to sell him. I think we should, but I wish him every success in his career and hope he doesn't suffer the injury problems that he does. I'm going to watch the Eric Dyer documentary. I think we're not going to sell 3 or 4 centre backs this window. And if I was to choose one to stay, it would be Dyer. So I hope he has a fantastic season, and then we see what happens. And as for Dele Alli, I think we'd still wish him.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt.
We all want to see him at the heights that he was and beyond.
Just quickly, 2 more things this week. Ange's interview, very good. He's comes across. Aussie's always come across like that. A real sort of, take it or leave it kind of guy. They asked him about Kane. I'm surprised it wasn't the first question. They said they were running a book on...
Was it the 3rd or 4th?
It was the 3rd, and he had it down as 6th. And I think Mile Jednak, the assistant manager, won the little bet they had. For me, they asked him about Kane, and he said, I don't really care, mate. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I'm not sure I believe that. I think he wants to know as much as we all do, and would be a problem for him if Kane left. I know he's thick-skinned enough to deal with it, but I think that must bother him slightly.
Yeah, of course it does. It would be unnatural to not, right? You've got probably the very best striker in the world currently available to you, and to then not have that would be pretty drastic. Of course he's bothered by it, but what else can he do? And the beauty of Ange is that I think whatever happens, he will take what he's got and look to make it the sum of its parts and make it work as best he can, rather than sitting there and saying, oh, that was a club signing, I'm not going to work with him. Oh, that guy wasn't my first choice, so therefore, how could I possibly...
Who are you talking about?
How could I possibly be expected to succeed in this job when you haven't given me my first choice, signings? He's not going to do that. He's going to get on with it. And everything in the way that he communicates, and we've seen it a lot this week, it exudes confidence in himself. I love that he is absolutely steadfast on a philosophy. He's going to stick with it. And something that resonated with me is you get on the train or you get off, and we'll find out very quickly who's on it and who's not. Fine, perfect. And you come in, you do your thing, mate.
Not quite train, but plane. Disappointed that there's not going to unlikely to be another centre-half on that plane.
They leave tomorrow morning?
Sorry, what plane? To Australia, tomorrow morning.
Then there's not going to be a centre...
what day it was. No.
There's not going to be a centre-back on that. It's quite incredible, isn't it? I mean, we all want early business, and we've done a few bits of really good early business, but to not have yet addressed the key area of the team, and for that to be still so much in the air, coming into the studio, reading reports that we're concerned that Liverpool are going to hijack the Van de Ven deal, what's going on with Tapsoba, but how have we not? Centre back. It's the critical area of the
we've
pitch.
been saying this for 3 weeks now, and we've done early business, and I thought we might carry on, but we seem to be faffing.
Yeah, and you've got a new goalkeeper that needs to develop that relationship. It's absolutely criminal that there isn't at least one new centre back on that plane. Hopefully, in the coming week that would change. But where we are right now, it's been a positive window, but that is deeply disappointing that there isn't a centre-back on the plane.
And another thing that's really hit the news this week with Spurs is ticket price hike. We're going to talk to 2 absolutely brilliant guests in a minute about this, 2 real experts on this situation. Just very briefly, Gaz, your thoughts on this?
I think it would be hard to find many fans that aren't appalled by this decision. It's not a good decision. It's not a good look.
Okay, let's get some expert insight on this matter right now. Delighted to be joined by two former chairs of the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust, Katrina Law and Martin Cloake. Both worked together for many years, making the Trust one of the leading supporters organisations in the country, and it's great to have them both with us now. Martin, I understand a happy birthday is in order. 21 again.
That was for yesterday, but thank you very much.
Yeah,
yes, 21 again.
And your present from the club was a ticket price hike. Knowing the club like you do and the board as you do, what are your thoughts on that decision?
I think my first thought was that at least we had about, 5 weeks of feel-good factor when we seemed to have like a decent manager who could communicate, who had the right ideas. We were making some signings and everyone was feeling quite positive, but you can usually rely on the board to, as somebody said, shoot itself in more feet than it was born with. So we did that again. So, you know, I'm a season ticket holder, so my season ticket isn't going up, but there are other implications, and I just don't think it's a particularly good look for the club. We've already got some of the highest ticket prices in Europe anyway, so it's kind of difficult to work out what the thinking was behind it. But I think we'll come on to that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's interesting that you mention the knock-on implications, because that hasn't been communicated yet, and there's so many of them. There's so much doubt that's been left in the aftermath of this, such as what does it mean for season ticket holders next summer? Should we be fearing a huge uplift in ticket prices? But more immediately, I'm wondering, as a season ticket holder, you can't get to every single game. Are we, it impacts us in our ability to potentially even be able to sell our tickets, because we can only sell our tickets after the general sale and so on. So there are knock-on effects. But do you have any insight into either of you have any insight into the further implications?
Probably one for you, Kat.
Yeah. So during the 10 years on the Trust board, I used to lead their ticketing work stream. So this is right in my wheelhouse. So Martin will bat it over here. Yes, you were talking about a season ticket holder not being able to make all of the games. Obviously, most of them get moved around for broadcast, which isn't particularly helpful, but that is the world we're living in. So it's really important that there is a resale facility for season ticket holders to move their tickets on. So that's at Spurs, an in-house ticket exchange, TEX for short. I did ask the Trust to check this, actually, because I couldn't quite believe that the club would potentially miss a trick here. As a season ticket holder, as the best I understand it, as a season ticket holder for next season, if you sell a ticket on ticket exchange for a league game that you can't make, you will receive the match categorization price back. So the published price today for this season is what you would get back. So your Cat A's, you get back whatever the published Cat A price is, which is obviously on an uplift on what you would have got back last season, because your season ticket price is frozen and the match day price is increased.
To be clear, my assumption had been, Kat, that the ticket would sell and I would get my value of season ticket as it was last season, and the club would get the uplift. But you're saying that I would get the uplift, not
yeah, looks like it.
Right.
But keep an eye on that. But that is the confirmation that we've had at the moment.
Let me just sort of be clear. I'm not looking for an uplift. I'm not looking to make an uplift, and nobody should be, right? But I had thought that it would be the club, so that's surprising to me.
Yes, I think there's an issue technically on TEX with paying more than one amount back, because there's a whole issue with TEX that you can't, as a member, a concessionary member, buy a concessionary seat on ticket exchange. You have to pay adult full price. So if you're a junior One Hotspur member and you're buying off TEX, you are going to be paying an adult rate. And when we argued about this, there were some complications with varying amounts going back to different people. Okay. So as far as I understand, the price that's paid is the price that you get. So that's probably how that's going to work out. But as Martin said, it doesn't mean that we're exempt season ticket holders from the members' price increase. Obviously, any cup games. So I know this year we only have the FA Cup and the League Cup, but any cup games that move out of categorisation, then we will be paying the higher rate. So that will affect us also. And then if you very roughly on the back of a fag packet want to calculate the price of your season ticket, if you look at the 19 league games and you look at your category B pricing from like this last season, it will roughly equate times 19 to what your season ticket price is. Yeah. So if you want to do that against the new category B price in your area, you might get an idea as to what the club are more than likely going to try and do next year. And in my seat, that's a 10% uplift, which is quite significant in the middle of a massive cost of living crisis.
Listen, I think the whole thing is an absolute disgrace, and it shouldn't have happened. And let's get into, and this is going to be a hypothetical conversation, but you guys might be able to bring some insight from your interactions with the board in the past. Let's get into why you think it has happened. What is the why? Why have they done this? Because as I break down the numbers, it looks to me like the difference, the maximum possible difference in terms of revenue for the club through this scheme between this season and last season, it looks to me, with random approximate numbers, it would be about £2.5 million, which in the scheme of things for a club like Tottenham Hotspur is peanuts, and in just such a bad look to pass that on to the fans. Why have they done this?
Well, I think it's probably the worst kept secret in football that they were absolutely going to put up season ticket pricing this year. And then, of course, we had the Conte explosion, we had the Stellini disaster, and we had the Paratici fiasco. And even Tottenham, who this week were quoted in the press, weren't they? Was it Jonathan Lou Martin? Who was it? He said they repeatedly punched themselves in the face.
They was famous for punching itself in the face, yeah.
Exactly right. So even they thought that they absolutely can't put up season ticket pricing on the back of all this. There's too much uncertainty and there was too much backlash. So they held that one back. But I mean, they hadn't, in fairness to them, they hadn't put them up for a couple of seasons. We'd had COVID, they hadn't put them up, etc., etc. They would normally increase in line with inflation. There's an issue there at the moment because inflation is obviously rampant. What they'll also do is they'll benchmark against other clubs in the division, some of whom have put their pricing up. They're absolutely fair. They have put their pricing up this season, but 99.9% of them are starting at a much lower price point than Tottenham are. We are amongst the most expensive tickets in Europe. So benchmarking for me is a bit of a dangerous practice. It tends to be used as an excuse to increase things, and not just by the individual clubs. I've been in meetings with the FA when they have increased pricing for FA Cup semis and FA Cup finals, and they've quoted Tottenham's pricing as a reason for doing that. So it becomes a dangerous precedent. You'll also get people comparing it to, let's say, a Beyonce concert. And then as fan reps, we have to have the argument that you don't go to see Beyonce 20 plus times in about 9 months, in a 9-month period. It's a totally different pattern of attendance. So I think that they were itching to put them up because they hadn't done them for a couple of years. They think they can do it under air cover because other clubs do it. And they then think that we have the best facilities in the world, which is why they can charge us more. But Martin, you might want to elaborate.
Yeah, I think you kind of get into a bigger argument about that. You know, what's the philosophy? It's no secret that when the £30 away price cap was brought in, Daniel Levy had said, "I hate the idea," to Richard Scudamore. That's been quoted as well. And I think from Daniel's worldview is pretty much let the market operate as freely as possible. So if the price gets driven up by good old supply and demands, then it's almost against the natural order of things not to allow that to happen. Now, what, in my opinion, and this is down to philosophy, and I mean, I wrote a piece this week which said that economics isn't a science, it's a choice, and it is a choice. You can decide to be a club which says, you know what, gate receipts are a really small part of our total income, especially in the era of mega bucks TV deals. And I think that in the TV deal before last, the FSA did some research where they said that on the basis of the TV money alone for domestic and international rights, every Premier League club could let every fan in for nothing for the whole season and still have more money than they had the season before. Now that is a figure, that's a concept that is really hard to get your head around, and most people go, that must be nonsense. But that's an indication of how important gate money is. Okay, so you've made reference to this earlier. They don't need to do this. There is another way of doing things. There's a famous quote from Uli Hoeneß when he was on the board at Bayern Munich, and he said we could charge much more than we do at the moment, but we would raise about £2.5 million if we uplifted from, I think he said, £150 to £300 for a season ticket. Imagine season tickets being that cheap. And he said, but we argue about that in 30 seconds in a transfer negotiation, and we're not here to milk the fans. That's not what we're about. Football should be for everybody. And so it's about a different model, isn't it? My idea, and I think probably most of us on the podcast, is that football is a business, but it is a business, to use a bit of a cliche, like no other. And one of the reasons it is a valuable business is because of things like brand identity and customer loyalty and community and all those supposedly romantic words, which actually have an effect on the cold, hard bottom line business argument, because you've got that audience that, the cliche, I'm not going to go and see Arsenal if I don't like what I've got on offer at Spurs, but if I don't like what's in Tesco, I'll nip along to Sainsbury's. That's it. So, should the fans who go to the match, should the fans who contribute to the atmosphere, which creates the product that the TV companies pay big money for, that creates the product that the one-off, match-going people, and one of the things I hate about lots of this discussion is the kind of blaming fans for exploiting themselves if they decide to pay the prices, but also this rating of like, are you a better supporter if you go to more or less games or whatever? There are different kinds of supporters, and I've got no problem with the people that are described disparagingly as the day trippers, because there is a role for them. Football should be for everyone, that cliche, and that is part of the audience. But the people who are being forgotten and who are being exploited by this are those regular match-going fans, who are the ones who are going to be creating the atmosphere that people come along and pay to be part of at a game, and certainly the atmosphere that the TV companies pay for. And you could have said up until 2 or 3 years ago, well, that's all very well. It's a lot of romantic nonsense, though, isn't it, Martin? That's just your view as some kind of fan culture activist or whatever. But we had COVID-19. And look at what happened to the product when there weren't any fans in the stadiums.
Correct.
Now, if that had gone on for a long time, I don't think the TV companies would have been paying the money that they're paying to televise football now. And I think that the spectacle of the live game as something that individuals wanted to go to wouldn't have been as attractive either. Now, we were told at the time that, of course, the game now realised how valuable fans were. Well, at Spurs, it doesn't really look like it, does it? Because here we are basically saying, look, we're going to charge as much as we can possibly get away with, and we're going to see how far we can push it, and then we're going to do it even more next time. And if you don't like it, we think there's going to be some other people coming in behind. And they're probably right, but I think there's a finite supply of people. There's also an issue coming up with some of the discussions that are going on around the TV deals, and that the view in the game at the moment is that there's probably one more big TV deal to go before the TV companies say, hold on a minute, younger audiences aren't buying subscriptions anymore. A lot of people kind of in late teens, early 20s are coming to football through video games rather than the live product itself. Are we getting value for money by paying all of this money into the game? And so if we get, and I'm very wary of saying the bubble's going to burst, because that's been a discussion that's been going on for 20 years.
Yeah.
But there could well be a time in a not too distant future when there is less TV money. And so what's going to happen then in terms of the way that the audience have been treated, the fans have been treated? So I think there's always been a short-termism about get as much money as you want while you can. But, for me, there is a bit of a, if you like, you want to call it romantic or moral issue as well. I think that they're exploiting the audience that the value of the business is built on. And there is something that isn't right about that. And it's one of the things that I don't like about the way our club conducts itself.
No, I completely agree. And I think one of the best advancements in football over the last couple of years is what you've alluded to, which is the £30 cap on away tickets, with fans being recognised, away fans in particular being recognised as an integral part of the product. That's obviously not ever going to happen uniformly across the Premier League for home fans. But I do agree with you, there is a short-termism, because how do we bring through the next generation of fans? But I wanted to ask both of you your views on the timing of it, which seems coincidental in the week straight after the Fan Advisory Board vote. Has it been dropped in before that board could get together? And because the idea of that board, as I understand it, is to communicate with the Tottenham board and then communicate that back to the fans, and have input into decisions made. So is there something cynical in it?
I mean, Martin and I both know, we're both familiar with the Friday afternoon drop. So when we co-chaired the trust,
So that's tactical. That is tactical.
Never got a Friday evening, because the club would just sneak anything out. Hope you were down the pub. You were going to forget about it after 10 vodkas. Probably did, in fairness. So there wasn't actually an announcement on this. It was a web story went up, and the web story, you needed to go like 3 links deep to find the actual pricing. It wasn't mentioned in the web story, and there wasn't actually an announcement. So I thought that was by stealth. I thought that was a bit covert. Didn't particularly appreciate that. If you're going to do something like raise your ticket pricing, at least own it. At least own it. And they didn't even try to do that. You're quite correct. The FAB were meeting on Monday evening, the fan advisory board, for their first ever session. So I felt that you could say one thing, it would have galvanized all the reps going in there, because every single one of them would have disagreed with the decision, and it would have given something nice and meaty to go toe to toe with the executive director and the head of fan engagement right from the off, which was quite nice. It could have been tactical to give them a quick win. Doesn't look like it's worked out that way. Or it could just have been...
I did wonder that, whether the fan advisory board would go in and negotiate a halfway point in the rise, and that would look like a quick win for the fan advisory board, and the board listening, and there's a sort of winning that all round. I did wonder if that might be something.
Huh? But we're so cynical. But that doesn't look like it's happened. And so, I mean, the FAB were meeting on Monday. I assume that we'll get some minutes at some point. I think they're on a 5-day turnaround on that. So we'll see what was discussed there. It would have seemed, if the club had a genuine intention of engaging in supporter consultation, that they would have tabled that at that meeting. But I mean, Martin will probably explain a bit more on this, because Martin led the negotiations for many months with the club around the establishment of the fan advisory board, on the back of the ESL fallout, the Tracy Crouch review, and the fan-led review being published. There is a crossover in work between how the trust operates on ticketing operations and policy, and how the FAB operates, that still needs to be ironed out. I guess it's teething problems. So I can understand that you weren't going to throw that into the first FAB, but Martin is getting up and moving.
He's had enough. Well, he's gone to get the birthday cake.
I was going to give you a moment in the sun on the fan advisory board.
I'll ask you, Kat.
I'm actually in my loft, and my cat was trying to break out of the loft, because I've got the kind of the door over the entrance. So it's
brilliant.
Like disruption. I've ruined the moment.
I'll ask you both. Just quick, on that. I know that you said there's some crossover with the trust and the FAB. If, in your experience, what would the process be on the trust to approach the club to deal with this situation?
Well, the process should be that the club would approach the trust and say, we want to talk to you about some policy changes, or about some initiative that we're considering, or whatever. We'd get on a call, we'd go through the pros and cons, we'd give them our feedback and our view as fans and elected fan representatives. We'd normally have some statistical data from some of the surveys that we'd run to check the mandate of our membership. We'd definitely have a feel for how things would be taken amongst match goers, because I don't think there's been a match in 10 years where people haven't come up to me and Martin and expressed some opinion on something, which is fine. That's what we're there for. That's what I'm still there for, and that's what we were there for. We're also very active across all social media channels, and the trust have a forum. So you basically have a good way of taking a temperature check on various issues. So that's how the club should use you. And also something like ticketing, we've made it our business to be very involved in the weeds of that for an awful long time. And we have developed policy with them in the past. And we have, the trust we had a great working relationship with the head of ticketing and the ticket office manager, and a lot of really good people work in that area. Super bright, very dedicated, really willing to listen to the fan point of view.
Did you feel like you were listened to? Did you feel like you were always listened to?
I think we were always listened to by the staff members, absolutely. I think, I probably say too much, but I think that the issue came when it went upstairs. Right. Because bearing in mind, it's the board at Tottenham who make the decisions on everything. Sure. So you may make a point and have your point landed at a departmental level, but that didn't always mean it would translate upstairs, which is why hopefully the FAB will help, because the board will look at it as part of a bigger business plan and a strategic plan that they would never share with the trust. They should have done, but they never would. So, Martin, do you want to pick up on the FAB stuff, or have I given you a hospital pass?
No. I mean, look, one of the we tried very hard, and I said I'd kind of, worked on this for quite a long time. And I mean, the FAB isn't as good as it should be, to be honest. It's potentially better than they were, but there's no secret that in the end the board at Spurs doesn't really want to listen to anybody. They make a show because they have to. of saying, we obviously want to take the fans' opinions on board. I think on operational matters and where they used to work well with us on ticketing, they'll do that. So when they were talking about setting up the ticket exchange, and I mean, we kind of were, we objected to that deal with StubHub. We had some real issues with that, and they have come to us at times over the years when we were working at the trust and said that we want to do this. How does this work? Do you think this will work properly? And we've looked on the operational side. I think the problem comes in that they don't want us anywhere near the commercial decisions, and that's partly that football boards have ever been like that. It's like, well, we own it, so what business is it of yours? We're going to do that, but. Kat's right in terms of that's what should have happened, and there should be some consultation. What would normally happen, particularly with anything around pricing, is that we get a phone call, usually at about 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, and then we would be told that they were going to do something, and then we'd say, well, one, we don't agree with that, and we didn't oppose everything they did, and I mean, one of the reasons we got hammered by a lot of people is because we didn't oppose everything that they did, and then other people said, all you need to do is just oppose everything the club did.
No.
So that's it. So, but that's part of it. So, we'd say, well, we don't agree with that, but also you'll just what it is. We disagree. Can we change this? And they say, well, the decision's already been made. And we'd say, well, that's not a consultation, then, is it? That's information. That's a different thing. Then we would get into the, you don't understand business, and you want us to sign loads of players and give them loads of money. And we'd say, basically, don't insult our intelligence. We know that the gate receipts are a really small part of the overall income, and what you're proposing isn't even going to pay half an hour's wages for a player, or whatever. And so there used to be a bit of a ding dong that would go on like that. Then we would put a statement out saying we don't agree with what the club done, and then they would shout at us and say we've been terribly unfair. And because however bad the club is at making a decision, the thing that you need to understand is that it's never their fault. They are always the victims of sort of people being terribly unreasonable to them, even when they've been incredibly greedy, as they have at the moment. And that's where the thing used to break down. And one of the annoying things is that it didn't have to be that way, that there are at every club there are fans who are prepared because they care about their club, and because some of it's self-interest. We want a decent deal and we want a good experience, but I think we all care about how our club comes across, how it conducts itself, and fans are prepared to put a lot of voluntary time in, and a lot of unpaid effort in to say, actually, you could do this a little bit better. And there's a view of depends where you're sitting, doesn't it? What are football fans? Well, football fans are everybody. So, they can be the kind of the creatures of tabloid horror stories over the years, or they can be, accountants and lawyers and various other people. And actually, football fans are all sorts of people with all kind of skills and all sorts of understanding, and clubs don't use them well enough. And on something like this, it's the kind of the pig-headedness, really, which is annoying as much as the actual decision itself. But the bottom line of it is that pricing is so expensive at this club now. Earlier this season, Daniel Levy, who doesn't do a lot of interviews, decided he would go and talk to people, and so we're better to go and talk to anybody when you're being accused of being aloof and detached than the Cambridge University Debating Society. So he did that. Another great PR masterstroke from the geniuses at the club who run that side of things. And he made a big thing there about, said we needed a bigger stadium in order to get the kids in, to get the families in. Right? When it costs a family of four over 400 quid to go to a single game, as it will do for quite a few games this season, you have to wonder how deep the commitment to getting the families in. That the club does a lot of genuinely really good work in the community. They're really respected and they do some really good stuff. But you're going to have to now start asking how deep is your commitment to the community when most members of that community cannot afford to get into the ground.
Well, on that, and one very on that, and I've got one last question because we've kept you guys long enough and it's late in the evening. But very, very quickly, where do we go from here? What can happen to address this and try to improve this situation? I know that's an open-ended question, but just what are your thoughts? What can we do from this point?
I'll start if you want, Martin. So I personally think that we've got to a point now where we need to take matters into our own hands, and we need a bit of direct action. So
I've seen you mention the protester against Man United. Personally, I think I think it should be once the game starts, we concentrate on the team. But I respect that that's one way of putting our voices out there.
So because I'm not involved with the trust anymore, I'm in a position where I can just ask, random questions on my own personal feed and get a lot of random answers. So I was gauging mood, I was kite flying to see what people thought. So I think it ended up being about half and half. Who said that yes, they would stay in the concourse or stay outside the ground for the first 15 minutes of the United game, and the other half had your point of view, which was there's a TIFO that I paid him for. It's Angie's first game. Really important to be in there. You got to respect all of that. You've got to respect all of that. So I also did another poll about a demo outside that had about 70% of people who voted backing it. I'm aware that Twitter can be an echo chamber and it might not always reflect all of reality, but it's an interesting dipstick. So for me, it's about time we actually did something. So, I mean, it's a proven fact that empty seats look really bad on TV. We've already discussed the COVID thing, but swathes of empty seats do not look good. So Bayern Munich did a concourse hold up when they played at the Emirates, and that was quite impactful. Liverpool obviously had their walkout on 77 minutes. That still gets quoted. Visual protests inside and outside the grounds are really, really effective. Dortmund are masters at that. They do some really, really good stuff. I think you can target sponsors. You can make it incredibly uncomfortable for those with commercial relationships with the club if the club is getting a lot of rep for being greedy, essentially. So there are things that you can do, and I think it's about time we all started putting our money where our mouth was and showing them exactly what we think about it, not just by writing nice letters or angry posts on Twitter. Yep. So I'm all for a bit of direct action. But longer term, you would hope that something like the FAB or IREF might make a difference. If they're in the room having those discussions at that higher strategic level, maybe. Don't know what you think, Martin.
There might be hope there because, again, going back to the £30 price cap, one reason that came in was a recognition of the contribution that away fans made. But there was also, Richard Scudamore, who was a fantastic negotiator, really, and certainly wasn't, fairly obviously wasn't a card-carrying member of the Communist Party in favour of nationalising everything, said, we are in danger, this is his quote, he said, we're in danger of looking like greedy bastards if we carry on with this amount of TV income and the ticketing policy we've got. So we need to do something to address that. And so that was fairly sensible. That was kind of emotional intelligence, wasn't it? And people could say, well, it was a kind of way of buying things off or whatever. And yes, it was. It diffused some of the argument about the greed in the game because, they'd apparently put something back. But that's what you're looking for. There is a recognition. And I think the club must know, I think it's difficult to underestimate how detached these people are sometimes. And, we did a lot of work with them and you build personal relationships. And so they'll probably go, what a nasty person Martin is because he's saying this. But we would have these discussions to their face as well. We'd say that, you can't, you have an assumption, for example, that, all old age pensioners are well off because all the old age pensioners that are well off. But it doesn't mean, it's a bit like me saying I did a poll on Twitter and that's what everybody thinks. You have to think that there's other things out there as well, don't you? So some of it needs a bit of emotional intelligence as well. But I think the reason I bring that up is that I think that it is possible to move the dial. And I think there is a role for writing letters and lobbying. There is a role for making the FAB work properly. And one of the things that the FAB can do is get the club to discuss its business plan and justify that. And I think, again, Kat, alluded to this earlier on, that the fact that this has been done fairly stealthily shows that the club must have some idea that, what they're doing isn't quite right. So, there are various different avenues that we can do things from. But I do think as well, and I respect that the difficulty with the first game, although if there were thousands of empty seats for Angie's first game, then it'd certainly make an issue of it. And it'd be interesting to see what Angie himself thought, bearing in mind he's on the record as talking about some of this stuff in the part as well. But I think that at some stage there is going to have to be some kind of visual indication of displeasure about this as well. But it's easy to talk revolution, isn't it? And what people want to do in the end is they want to go and see their football team and enjoy being there and have a decent time, and that absolutely has to be respected. But I just think we've kind of got to a little bit of a tipping point now, and this is going to carry on unless there is some indication that actually we're not going to stand for it anymore.
Yeah, this probably is not the end of it. Kat and Martin, thank you so much for coming on. You've both mentioned your Twitter feeds. If people don't know where you are, and I'll be surprised if they don't, you're such great people on social media. Where can people find you? Promote yourselves, books, whatever it is you're doing.
Originally Martin Cloake on Twitter, and I dipped a toe into Thread, so I'm Martin Cloake 65
Okay.
which may give a clue to my age on there.
Wow.
And yes, there is. Well, yeah, Cat.
Okay.
Sorry, and I'm at Catspur71 on Twitter, and I'm not on Threads. I'm threadbare.
Threadbare. Listen, thank you both so much for coming on. It really, genuinely great to get your insight and your experience and your knowledge on this situation, which I'm sure will run and run.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for giving us the opportunity for a good, reasonable discussion as well.
Thank you. That's what we try to do. Hopefully it came across that way. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Brilliant insight, Gaz, from Kat and Martin on that. I don't want to pick up on the negative because I think there's some really interesting stuff, but I'm going to. I'm not sure I agree with the walkout. I mentioned it there when we were talking to Kat. The 15-minute walkout against Man United. For me, I'm not sure that works. It might work in the sense as Kat said, it might look good and Levy might resonate with Daniel Levy at some point, but just got to support the team, especially in the second game of the season.
It's not, I think, that you're picking up on a negative. The whole idea is, where do we go? What can we do? Because as fans, sometimes we can feel a bit powerless. I'm with you. I think when the game kicks off, you sit and you support your team, or stand and support your team and get behind them come what may. And I don't agree with walkouts. I do think that there is a case for a protest outside the stadium, before the game. And you know, when we talk about protests, we've seen some protests last season. With the problem with those protests, and the reason people think that perhaps you know, a protest may not take off, is they see the sort of Enoch out protest. But that's a very polarizing, complex debate.
Yeah. And
people have many views on it, and that's why I think that doesn't take off. This is a very singular issue
which everybody probably agrees
that I reckon 99% of fans can get behind.
But are they prepared to protest about it? There's
we all
difference.
Get to the game. You know, we all do arrive at the game an hour and a half early. Why wouldn't it be possible for fans to walk down, maybe not from Seven Sisters, but you know, stand outside the ground until 15 minutes before a game, chanting about ticket prices or whatever, not going into the stadium until the very last minute?
It might not be as visible to the
It might not be visible on the outside, but it's, who cares? It's about the board recognising. It's about the board sitting up and taking notice and hearing the anger of the fans. Yeah. And that's what I quite like about a mass protest on the street, is that you're not carrying it into the stadium, but the board should hear the anger and fury of the fans. It's not right. It's not okay. I don't agree with it. And it is a singular issue that I think most fans could get on board with. Look, I'm not going to go out and organise a revolution or a protest, but if somebody said to me, right, you know, before the United game, an hour before kickoff, we're going to be outside the stadium chanting and protesting, I'd be like, yeah, I'll join that.
Before that, protest may or may not happen. Do you think the club will read the room, and do you think maybe something will happen? This 20% rise might become 15 or 10%, or do you think they're going to stay thick-skinned and that's it?
Well, I thought it would. I thought it might have been a little bit strategic in the sense of the fan advisory board coming in and being able to gain a quick win and meeting a halfway point. But Kat seems to suggest that, you know, that's out the window and that's not going to happen. So she's diminished my hopes of that. I think it is going to stay. I'm concerned about the knock-on implications for season tickets next season as well. It's not a good state of affairs at all. It's terrible optics from the board. The fans are suffering. I don't know how you get the new generation of fans into the stadium with that sort of level of ticket price. Something needs to be done.
Okay. Listen, pre-season has started, but the games are starting soon. Looking forward to players getting back on the pitch.
Yeah, I can't lie. I'm not staying up to watch those games. But I will watch them on record. Right. I
haven't actually looked at the kickoff times, but I'm working myself on the Women's World Cup, so I might be up anyway because that's over in Australia and New Zealand. So I'm going to be on Australia time. So
no, I'm looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to seeing signs of Ange Ball, as we call it now. Yeah. But I won't be watching it live. Absolutely no chance.
Okay, Gary, great to have you on as always. I thought the chair was superb tonight. Really good insight. As I said at the start, possibly better than Jake. So we might invite him back on, or her back on.
Start commenting that it's better than me.
No, you're okay. Gary, thanks for coming on again. Great to hear from Kat and Martin, and great to hear from you as well. And as always, we will be back next week, and up the Spurs.